This and all the free content of Addressing Gettysburg is brought to you by our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. Become a patron today and help support the show while getting exclusive content made just for you. That's patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. And we thank you in advance.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, patrons, and welcome to this episode on Patreon. We have done a few episodes on the music of Addressing Gettysburg, and I get a lot of compliments from people on the music. It's not, what would you say? It's not boring. It's not bland. It's not second rate, some people say. And that has more to do with the people performing it than myself. But, at the end of the day, I do choose to put it in. So I guess I have a little bit of say in the whole thing. And that's what people like. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about another facet. So in the previous Music of Addressing Gettysburg episodes that we've done, we talked about the stringed music that I recorded or people recorded for me. This is a little different because now we're getting into the territory of music that I'm stealing for all intents and purposes. Of course, with permission. And today we're going to talk about the Federal City Brass Band. Jari Villanueva is the director, right, Yari?
That's correct.
Yes, you're the director of the Federal City Brass Band, and he was kind enough, not knowing who I am, just cold emailed him and asked him if I could use his music, and he was kind enough to send me the CDs, and I started putting that in. And I have to say, Yari, I feel that the production value of my show went up 1,000 points because you allowed us to use that music, and I really appreciate you doing so. So anything I can do to promote you to my listeners is okay with me. So welcome to the show, and thank you for agreeing to do this.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And the Federal City Brass Band has a great affiliation with the town of Gettysburg. We have been up every year for the Remembrance Day Parade in November for the past 15, 16 years. And we've performed around Gettysburg. We've performed on the battlefield. And we've performed for events around town. So love being up there. And I'm so glad that the music that you've chosen from our CDs can help enhance your telling of a great story.
Oh, yeah, I am too. I mean, it really does. To me, I'm proud of the whole thing, but I think the brass music, to me, it makes it just cinematic. You know, it makes it feel like a movie, and like there's a lot of money behind this project when in reality there's none. So, so it's great. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's fine, and that's one of the things that the Federal City Brass Band, is attempting to do is to get people to understand what this music, sounded like. Mm-hmm. We like to say with our band, come and listen to what history sounds like.
Right. And do you use like period instruments?
We use period instruments, playing music from the era, from the band books that existed back during that time. We wear period correct uniforms of the time. So the appearance of the band, the music that we play on the instruments, takes you right back to mid-19th century.
So you have those old horns where the bell points backwards.
Correct. Yes, they're called over-the-shoulder sax horns. Uh-huh. But we also have the instruments that also have the bells that go straight up and the bells that go straight to the front. Because there were so many variations of these sax horns during that time. Rotary valve. There were some piston valves, and then, like I said, the bell shaped or the bell pointed to the back, to the top, and to the front. but all these were these instruments that were found in the regimental bands at that time.
Were they pointed backwards? Was that so the troops marching behind could hear the music?
That's exactly correct. Yeah.
Oh.
The bell pointed to the back is an American invention. You don't see that with any other like European bands. It's strictly an American idea. And the reason is that the bands usually played at the front of a parade or on the march if they were moving from one area to another. Uh-huh. And the troops wanted to hear the music.
Sure.
So yeah. This was an ingenious way to have it, be heard by the troops.
Yeah, it's a good morale booster to be able to hear the music.
Exactly.
So let's talk about you for a little bit. So I'm assuming you've played music your whole entire life?
Yes. I've been a brass player since I was a little kid. I went to the Peabody Conservatory where I got my degree in music education, taught for a while. Then I spent 23 years with the Air Force Band in Washington, D.C., and have taught at the local universities at UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, was there for 10 years. And I've worked as a professional musician all my life. So, I've been involved with music for a long time.
Good. And how did you get, did you start the Federal City Brass Band or did you join it?
The idea for starting the Federal City Brass Band was mine, along with a great musician by the name of Mark Elrod.
Okay.
And Mark is a great historian, too. Mark has written a book about the Civil War brass instruments. The idea came around the year 2001. I had spent 4 or 5 years as a reenactor. I started reenacting as a field musician, as a bugler, and then decided, well, let's do some brass band stuff. And I contacted Mark Elrod, and we put our heads together, put music together, contacted people who were interested in playing this type of music, and voila, the Federal City Brass Band was born. Our first real engagement came in the fall of 2002 when we did an event at Antietam. And since then, the band has been going very strong.
I think I have a memory of seeing you guys at some of the reenactments here years ago. Am I correct in remembering that?
That is correct. That's one of the things that the Federal City Brass Band has done, where we've actually gone to events and actually camped out with the troops and spent the weekend doing what a band does. Playing for ceremonies, playing in the evening concerts, and playing for the enjoyment and esprit de corps. Providing esprit de corps for the men during the weekend. It really gives us a great insight into what those musicians did during the Civil War.
Yeah. Now, did musicians kind of also double as stretcher bearers when a battle was on? Is that how that worked?
Yes. And it's important to point out there are two types of musicians, or two types of music, during the Civil War. Well, in reality, there was three, and you talked about one of the kinds earlier on when you were talking about the fiddle music and the folk music that you've used. That was one type of music, but in the military during the Civil War, there were two types of music. There was the field music, and that was the music that was performed by fifers and drummers and buglers. Mm-hmm. Those are the musicians who played the calls that were necessary to move the troops around on the battlefield and in garrison. And then there was the brass bands that provided that little touch of home, that music, to play for the troops. And the brass bands were part of the regiments. Every regiment that was formed brought along their town band at the beginning of the war. But not only did they, work as musicians, playing for the ceremonies, playing for church services, playing for funerals, even playing for executions. They also, when the battle started, they assumed extra duties, and one of them was stretcher bearers, and also as assistants in hospitals.
Okay. So like here at Gettysburg, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm just going through my brain, seeing if I've heard any stories, at least in the Union Army, of bands playing. I know I've heard of some in the Confederate Army, but would they have been playing like at night or?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Bands would be serenading, and there were many bands at Gettysburg during that battle. On both sides, and the Confederate band that you're talking about that actually played it during the battle was the band of the 26th North Carolina Regiment.
Yeah.
During the second day, they were actually pulled from their hospital duties. They were taking care of their comrades who had been wounded the day before. When they were called to go and play on the battlefield, and they were joined up with another band, the 11th North Carolina band, and so putting these two bands together, they went out onto the battlefield and played polkas and waltzes and quick steps.
Jeez.
And it was even mentioned in newspapers. Had heard about this, and author Lieutenant Colonel Fremantle, who was an observer, wrote in his diary that he heard the music of a Confederate band playing, and what a curious sound it was that to hear these polkas and waltzes with the bombs going all around.
That's one of the things I love about reading about war, those contrasts, those things that just make everybody seem insane, like a battle's going on and there's a brass band playing polkas. It's kind of like Nero fiddling when Rome burns. It just, yeah.
Almost, but it really helped the troops.
Sure.
It provided solace to them. In a weird way, I guess.
Well, I guess it's like soldiers today listening to an MP3 on their phone.
Exactly.
Same idea.
Exactly. Yes.
And you mentioned the 26th North Carolina Regimental Band. I just wanted to say to people that your CD that you sent me, Better Than Rations or Medicine, is with both bands, yours and theirs. Is that how that works?
Correct. The Federal City Brass Band also does the 26th North Carolina Regimental Band. And I always like to joke around saying, well, we take our blue coats off and we turn them inside out and they're gray. But in reality, we have a whole different set of uniforms. And we've researched that band, and we do programs that are specifically about the history of that one band, from their joining up in April of 1862 with the 26th, all the way to the end of the war near Appomattox, when they were captured by Union troops and sent to a prisoner of war camp. This band was made up of Moravian musicians from Salem, North Carolina, who were, tinsmiths, bookbinders, businessmen in town who also played in the town band. Huh. And they formed up, and because they wanted to do their patriotic duty,
right? So they
served with this regiment for the duration of the war, playing at Gettysburg, and then when they finally were able to get home in July of 1865, they bought new instruments because the instruments they had were taken from them by the Union soldiers who captured them. They got new instruments, and then they continued on as the Salem Town Band.
Huh, that's pretty cool.
And that band still exists.
Really?
To this day.
Wow.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
The Salem band is part of the Moravian Music Foundation. It's one of the few bands that still, can trace its roots to the Civil War. There are some community bands that have Civil War roots. It's amazing, and these bands are still in existence today.
That's fascinating. So I remember when we were doing the episodes when we started using the brass music. When it came time to do the credits, because on the Better Than Rations CD, it says music of the Civil War performed by the Federal City Brass Band, 26 North Carolina Regimental Band. And there's a line separating the two. So I thought that maybe this was another reenacting band that you teamed up with, but you're saying you actually do both.
Correct.
Gotcha.
We're all the same guys. We just switch uniforms and accents.
Okay. All right. So, we talked a little bit beforehand about, what you guys are doing, during, this year is shot for everybody, of course, because of the shutdown and all that. You guys haven't really been doing much or anything, right?
Correct. And we're really hoping that next year things will go back. There were some reenactments scheduled. They've sort of fallen by the wayside. We were going to do an event down in Tennessee in October, but that now has fallen through. We're hoping that the annual Remembrance Day still goes on. We usually march in the parade, and then we do a little tribute to the boys on Little Round Top starting at 4 p.m., playing up the sunset.
Oh, that's
on
cool.
Remembrance Day. We've been doing that for many, many years. In fact, I went ahead and I've applied for a permit for this year, and I'm hoping to hear back from them with an A-OK for it. But I know that the Park Service, they want to be as careful as possible.
Yeah.
With everything that's going on.
I know someone who's in another reenacting unit, and they wanted to do like demos, like that they do at the Pennsylvania Memorial or something like that. And the Park Service said, yes, but you have to distance and you have to wear masks. And they said, well, that's going to be kind of like, what are we going to do? Just skirmish lines the whole time? so they just decided they're not going to try to do it. But I hope they would let you do that, though. And I hope by Remembrance Day, things are somewhat back to normal, although I have no faith that they will be. But that's another show.
Before you go on, November is such an important time in Gettysburg because it's not only the Remembrance Day activities, but there's also Dedication Day.
Yeah.
In the National Cemetery. So keeping my fingers crossed.
Yeah, that would be. I know it would disappoint a lot of people if they canceled things because people look forward to it. I get people asking me questions all the time about. Actually, this whole year since the quarantine, back in like April or May, people are like, are they going to cancel Remembrance Day? I'm like, how the hell do I know? I don't even know if they've canceled June yet, like let's get to the fall first.
Well, one thing they have continued on that I should plug is the 100 Nights of Tap.
Well, that was my next question, so go ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay. We're about to finish up our 4th season of providing taps every single night at the Soldiers Monument in the National Cemetery. This year, the Park Service lifted the permit because of the virus. So for the first almost month or so, we could not do any live performances, and we were doing it via video every evening. But in June, they gave us the A-OK for having the ceremonies. And so we've been every single night. There's been a bugler sounding taps at 7 p.m. at the monument. The crowds have been very small. I think you can call it the crowd. A few people who come, and we've been doing the social distancing. But we are having our closing ceremony is on Labor Day, and I'm so glad. I'm very thankful to the Park Service and thankful to the Lincoln Fellowship of Pennsylvania for persevering with this and continuing it, because I would have hated to have the program not continue. So we're going to finish up the season, which is terrific, and then we'll plan for next year.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're allowed to actually come back and actually do that instead of doing. What did you mean? What do you mean you did it by video? What, you'd have somebody with a cell phone there, and how would that work?
Oh no. Well, what we did was Wendy Allen, who's the founder.
Yeah, well, she was on this show.
She a wonderful lady, and
she was great.
Yeah. Oh my goodness!
She laughed at all my jokes, Yari. She laughed at all my jokes, so I became an immediate fan of hers.
Well, she's a wonderful lady. What we did for the first several weeks was that the bugler would submit their video to us, and Wendy would do a presentation from her place, announcing what was going on, and then we featured the video of this bugler playing in his hometown, and
cool.
That's what we did.
Oh, okay.
So it was kind of nice. For the opening ceremony, and we had guest speakers. We pre-recorded their speeches and then put together a little video, and it came off very nice. But it's so nice to do it live.
Sure. Well, there's something chilling and very moving about hearing taps play over either the cemetery or the battlefield itself. And there are people that come and do it when it's not related to any kind of organized thing like 100 Nights of Taps. I'll give you a quick story. My friend was visiting, and we went down to Rose's Woods. We were walking along the old path there, the old electric trolley path. And I was doing a live video on my Instagram channel. And now I am not one of these people that believes in ghosts. And any of my followers know this, and some of them do, and they tease me that I don't believe in ghosts, and they're always trying to make me fall for it. And so it's when we were going in there, it was like 8:45, something like that. It was getting dark. And people were saying in the video, in the comment section, they're saying, "Oh, good, we're going to see ghosts." And I said, "Oh, we're not going to see any ghosts." I said, "I'll tell you what, we'll walk into the middle of the woods. It's getting dark. We'll just stand there in silence, and I guarantee you nothing's going to happen." So we go in, we stand there in silence. It had rained earlier in the day. And you know how sometimes water pools on a leaf and then it falls off? A big drop will fall off and land on the ground or whatever. So we're standing there in pitch dark silence, and a big glob of water falls down and lands on a leaf and makes a splat noise off to our right rear. And my friend kind of jumps, and I kind of jumped, and I said, "Oh, wait, no, that's just water." So, okay, let's start it again. Let's be quiet, okay? So now we're quiet again, and I swear, we start hearing taps play. And, if you pay attention to any of these ghost stories, some of them say, "Well, we heard the sound of cannon fire, and it was 10 o'clock at night, and there were no reenactments going on at that time, and we were down by the wheat field." And I was like, "Well, what were you doing out there at 10 o'clock at night? You're supposed to be gone. It's closed." But so now, and then sometimes you hear them saying that they hear musket fire or bugle calls. And so I hear this, and it's a very faint taps. And so I'm like, wait a sec, that can't be right. We can't be hearing what we're hearing, but we're both hearing it. And everybody on the video is like, "Oh, I told you, see. So then we said, no, there's got to be an earthly explanation. So first thing I said was, somebody watching, go Google 100 Nights of Taps and see what time they do it. And it was 7 o'clock, and we were out there. It was closer to 9 at this point. So I'm like, okay, it's not that. And then I realized it was just some nerd with a trumpet up on Little Round Top, because I've seen people do this before. They'll go out with a bugle or a trumpet or whatever they've got, and they'll blow taps out across the valley because they want to. It's not like any organized thing. It's just one guy with his bugle or trumpet. And that's what it was. But it gave us a scare for a minute.
And you know what? It may have been me.
Oh, really?
Because,
well, then I'm sorry I called you a nerd.
I was about to say I'm one of those nerds. A lot of times when I come up to Gettysburg and I'm leaving and it's sundown or something, I will stop by and I'll pull the horn out and I'll walk over, and just without talking to anybody, I'll see people standing around. I'll walk over and I'll play, and then I'll leave.
Well, then it must have been you then. Because first of all, because here's why I'm thinking it was you, because Taps is a hard song to play, and I've heard people try to play it, and it's hard. Like, I'm not a trumpet player, but I could tell it's hard. And I didn't notice any mess ups. And I usually, because I'm a musician and I always listen for mess ups, and I didn't hear any. So it must have been you. But
well, thanks.
Well, go ahead. What?
I was going to say thanks. If it was me, thank you. Because, sometimes I get a little nervous when I'm playing in such a, sacred spot.
Yeah, well, and I can understand that, but it is a moving thing, especially to be down in the valley and hear it faintly in the distance through whatever makes it through the leaves on the trees. It's a cool feeling to be out there when you hear that song. There's something about that song. That song played on a trumpet, and anything played on the bagpipes at a funeral just get me. Yeah. It's because of the Irish boy in me. But, and back on the nerd comment, our little community, we call ourselves Getty's Nerds. So we'd be very happy to include you in the Getty's Nerd community.
Sure.
Don't sound so enthusiastic.
Let me tell you. No, I was about to say, then again, it may have been a ghost playing.
Oh, no, don't. No, it wasn't a ghost.
Listen, well, I remember one time I was up there and I played.
Okay.
And I was about to leave, and then I heard somebody playing from a distance. And I'm listening, I'm thinking, I had no idea who it was. And then I was walking away saying, is there a ghost up there? So,
well, maybe it was just another person who had a trumpet or a bugle and heard you and then decided to answer back.
Yeah, coincidence. It's, and I hope the Park Service is not upset about this. Because people like to go up there, musicians like to go up there with a bugle and sound taps, to honor those men who fought there. And it's really during the summer, as the sun is setting, because a lot of people like to go up there and watch the sunset. It is really something to have someone at the moment as the sun hits that crest of the hill, to hear the notes of taps. Yeah,
it is.
And I have one of my videos that I've done was recorded just as it was going down, and it was quite moving.
Yeah, people do love the sunset here. We do live videos on Facebook or Instagram of the sunset from various parts, and by far Little Round Top is one of the favorites for people to see it. It's just beautiful. I love it. That's what I love about living here. It's the sunsets. Well, many things, but that's one of them.
Yeah, and for anyone listening to this podcast, on Remembrance Day, if it happens and we get the permit, we're going to have a number of musicians again on Little Round Top playing from 4:00 till sunset, and we always gear our program in two parts. The first part is quick steps and waltzes and polkas and the up music, the rally around the flag, things like that. Then the last part of the program is solemn, where we play hymns to close out the evening, and then we have just a little ceremony where we'll recite some lines about the Civil War. We have a bugler then who sounds taps, and then the band plays "Home Sweet Home."
Oh, nice.
Which was a traditional piece that was played by bands. You may not know that during the Civil War there were Battle of the Bands.
Yes, place. I've heard of those. Yes, yeah.
Where they a Confederate band and a Union band might be on the opposite side of a river or a hill or something, and one band would strike up with "Rally Round the Flag" and to be answered by Dixie,
right?
Which would be then the Union band would play "Battle Hymn of the Republic," and then the Confederate band would play "The Bonnie Blue Flag," and would go back and forth, and they'd play, and crowds would gather, soldiers would gather on either side to listen to the band, and they would shout out, "Now play this, now play that." And Bruce Canton actually writes about it in one of his books, about the thousands of soldiers who would be listening, and then the evening would close with the bands playing "Home Sweet Home" and all the men singing. And then he said, and then Canton would write, then the next day they'd go back to slaughter each other.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's the weirdest part about these stories is that you have those moments and then the next day they're all trying to kill each other.
Yeah.
It's horrible. Well, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, every time I think about that, it's just so moving. But that's what, music did to those, back then. It was such an important part of, the everyday life.
And it still is, even though modern music is horrible, but it still is one of those things that can take two disparate groups of people, perhaps even people that hate each other, but with the right set of circumstances and, all these stars aligning, can for a moment make them forget all that stuff and bring them together before they go back to killing each other. And that's the power of music, I think, is if you can go from wanting to kill each other to listening to music and having a battle of the bands and good fun, and then going to bed and waking up in the morning and killing each other again, that shows how powerful that is.
Yeah. And the other thing too is that, these bands brought that little bit of home to the troops. Music that was popular at the time. And, during the Civil War, ballads were very popular. Operatic arias were popular. And they would take a lot of these songs, especially the slow songs, and they turn them into marches so that they could actually play, so that the troops could actually listen to them while they were marching. But it was so important. And, this tradition continues on after the Civil War to the Spanish-American War, World War I, where we had bands that went over to France. We had it was well over 100 bands that went to France during World War I that played for the troops. And then, of course, that tradition then continues on to World War II. Glenn Miller, bringing forming his group to go over and play, his desire to bring that music right up to the front lines as much as possible. And unfortunately, then that dies out, after Vietnam with, people bringing their own music, radios and stuff.
Yeah.
So, but actually today, we do send musical groups from the Air Force and the Army who go over there and perform for our troops. So they are, still continuing in that tradition of, bringing a little bit of that home taste, to the front line.
Yeah, you got to have
which
that.
Is really important.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
And it's one thing to listen to it on your iPods or iPhones or whatever, but to hear a live group, play, it's just completely different.
Yeah, and then the armed services also have bands that they send around the country and the world for PR purposes. A friend of mine plays in the Navy Country Band, which I never thought would exist.
Right.
But they're great,
I
though.
think they're called, I think they're called country current.
Yeah, that is correct.
And the premier bands in Washington, they have specialized groups like that. Country bands, they have the pop groups, the rock groups, they have the jazz ensembles. In addition to having the concert bands, the string orchestras, and the vocal groups and stuff. And then, of course, the group I was involved with the Air Force, we were the ceremonial unit. So my job was to play all the ceremonies around Arlington and the White House and the Pentagon and at Andrews Air Force Base. We were the guys that played the martial music. While the other guys did the concert music.
Right.
So, which is something I really enjoyed in my 23 years, because to me, we were providing the music, the martial music that was required by the military.
Yes.
It was nice to have, the concerts and stuff performed by these great musicians. But there was a need to perform, a need to have a band play at a funeral to march down the hill. So that's what I did, and I enjoyed it.
I love watching the old guard fife and drum corps. Those guys, those drummers are crazy. I mean, that's some crazy stuff they can do.
They are wonderful musicians. The old guard fife and drum, they were formed in 1960. A great drummer by the name of George Carroll pushed the idea of having a colonial fife and drum corps within the old guard, because they had the old guard color guard set up with the uniforms and everything, and the muskets. And he said, well, you guys need to have music.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, he kept pushing for this, and the general that he was working, presenting this idea to, said, well, the fifes and the drums sounds great, but you got to have bugles too. And George Carroll goes, well, wait a minute, there weren't any bugles. Right. And the general says, but I want bugles. And George Carroll said, but sir, there weren't any bugles. And this general, 1960, so he's a World War II guy from the bugle corps stuff. But the general says, you want to fife and drum, right? I want bugles. So George Carroll said, yes, sir.
I always wondered why there were bugles with them.
That's why there are bugles in the old guard fife and drum.
That's fascinating. I love that.
With their formation. But it's what they've done is to incorporate it so well.
Yeah.
Into their routine. And what a great group. I love hearing them. And the Federal City Brass, by the way, we were honored to be participants in their 50th anniversary concert that they did in 2010 at Fort Myer. They had fife and drum corps from all over to participate. They selected, I shouldn't say all over, but and they had the Hellcats from West Point come down. They had the U.S. Marine Drum and Bugle Corps participate, and one Civil War band. Us.
That's
and
cool.
It was a wonderful evening.
I feel like I've seen that on YouTube. Is that on YouTube?
It is on YouTube. Our part of the program is on there.
Yeah,
and it's an 8-minute segment, because there were so many bands. We had to have short segments. Mm-hmm. It was wonderful. There's a great backstory into it, in that the air conditioning broke. And it was like a 90-degree day, and just horrible at night. And the air conditioner broke, so in the evening it was unbearably hot inside that place. So when you watch the video, when we march off, the band gets a huge amount of applause, because everybody knew that we were wearing these heavy wool uniforms.
So the air conditioner that worked in your favor there for the applause. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it was a great evening.
Okay, so let's get to the episodes here. So episode 2 is where the brass music starts coming in. I hadn't asked you for it when I was editing episode 1 because I guess I didn't think to, or I don't know what came about that made me ask you for it. But I put it in episode 2, and the first one that we hear in that one, and this is episode 2, part 1, we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to go back and listen to these, take extensive notes as we talk so that you can go back and listen, and the show will have a whole new meaning for you. Dixie is the first brass band song that we hear, and it's played as I'm talking about the Army of Northern Virginia after Chancellorsville. They're victorious. Lee's a little concerned because he's like, yeah, that was pretty lucky. We need supplies and things. But morale is high in the Army, and so Dixie is a big, rousing number. I mean, that's pretty simple there as to why I put that in. But Yari, what's the history of the song Dixie? That was written by a Yankee, wasn't it? Or a Northerner?
Yeah, the tune Dixie was written by a fellow by the name of Daniel Emmett, who was a musician and also a terrific drummer. He actually wrote a fife and drum manual that was used by the Army. Also, he was part of a minstrel show in the North, and had written this tune, Dixie, as part of a minstrel show. And one of the early performances of it, Abraham Lincoln heard the tune and actually fell in love with it.
Yeah.
Lincoln liked that tune a lot, and at the end of the Civil War, it actually asked for its performance on the night of the Confederate surrender. Dixie was the unofficial anthem of the South. We didn't have a national anthem in the North. Star Spangled Banner doesn't come about until 1931. The South also did not have a national anthem, but as far as songs go, Dixie probably fills that bill for being a national song. But started off as a minstrel song and became very popular. Played at the inauguration for Jefferson Davis, and played by bands on both sides. Mm-hmm. Everybody had an arrangement of it, and the particular arrangement I believe that you have is from the Squire's Band Book, a book of Civil War tunes that was published towards the end of the Civil War.
Okay. And you mentioned the Star Spangled Banner. That was a song then, right? But it wasn't our national anthem until the 1930s. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yeah. The Star Spangled Banner was one of our patriotic tunes, just like Battle Cry of Freedom and Yankee Doodle and America. Those were the tunes that were very strongly associated with the northern side, and also I almost left out Battle Hymn of the Republic, which became the battle cry, the anthem of the northern armies. But none of them were the official anthem of the country at that time.
What I found interesting on the CDs you sent is that the Battle Hymn of the Republic isn't on it. There's one called Battle Hymn, if I'm not mistaken, but it's not the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
It's Battle Hymn Quick Step.
That's it, yeah.
Yes, and Battle Hymn is at the very end of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the Battle Hymn is in a quick step format, and that actually came from the band books of the 25th Massachusetts Band, and it has two sections of music before the Battle Hymn appears.
I see. Okay.
It was written in the same manner as if, like John Philip Sousa, when he wrote the Field Artillery March, he has all these sections before you get to the Over Hill, Over Dale, we will hit the Dusty Trail song. Mm-hmm. So it's written in that same type of manner.
Gotcha. And I guess maybe at this point we should we should define a few things, because you said quick step. We're going to hear other terms like gallop, but it's spelled with one L. What do these words mean? What is a quick step?
A quick step is basically a march. When you march to a quick step, you march to about at the metronome marking at around 100 beats per measure. It wasn't very fast
per minute,
but it was per minute. Yes,
yeah.
So sorry.
Was it 100 beats per measure? That's crazy.
Sorry. I keep seeing that. The reason I said measure, because you see it above the measure.
Yeah.
But beats per minute. A quick step was anywhere from 100 to 120, somewhere around that. It was the natural gait for the marching tempo.
Gotcha. Okay. And then go ahead. Yeah, keep going.
I was going to say, because you hear something when you say, you hear versions or hear people talking about the double quick step, which means it's faster.
But it's not 200 beats per minute.
No, not quite.
Yeah.
that's a full out run.
Right. And then the other term is gallop, but with one L.
Right. A gallop is a type of dance, and there were all types of dances, of course, during the Civil War: minuets, polkas, and waltzes, and schottisches. And the gallop was a piece that was played at a very quick tempo. You almost skipped to it down the line. And it's really great to see people who know how to dance a gallop. I
think I know what you're talking about. I think I've seen that. Have you ever seen the...
Very fast.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, these partners, as they move very quickly down the center of an aisle, almost skipping together.
Yes.
It's wonderful to watch. Gallops also are usually very short, because you can only dance that fast for a short period of time.
Yeah, I would get tired just watching someone dance like that.
Exactly.
All right, so the next song after Dixie is the Battle Cry of Freedom. I chose that. It's a very Yankee song. And that plays while I'm talking about the changes that Joseph Hooker made in the Union Army and the state of affairs in the Union Army after the Battle of Chancellorsville, the changes in commands, various things like that. I kind of have it as the theme of the Union Army when I talk about it in a general term, but only when it pertains to the commanding general. So like changes Hooker made, or changes that were made because of people not being able to stand serving with Hooker. And then later on, when we get to Meade taking command, it's revived again in the same manner there. Battle Cry of Freedom, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the Battle Cry of Freedom, I believe, was written by George Root, and it's one of the most patriotic songs of the Civil War. Yes, we'll rally round the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the Battle Cry of Freedom. A song that was very easily memorized, very easy to sing. It was known by Battle Cry of Freedom, but also was known as Rally Round the Flag. Tunes like that were very patriotic and very inspirational. I guess if that's a good word to use for soldiers. Great song. At one time was under consideration as the national anthem of our country. It was that popular.
It's a good song.
It's a wonderful song. So it's to use it in that context as you just described is very good.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
One thing is, since you mentioned about Meade, it's very interesting that when after the Battle of Gettysburg, after Pickett's charge was repulsed, some of the Union bands started playing "Hail to the Chief" for Meade, and and someone commented to him, "You better watch out. You might be president one day."
The next one then is Soldier's Chorus. Now this one plays when I talk about General Milroy, in command of the garrison at Winchester, Virginia. And Milroy is, from my take on Milroy, and I don't think I'm alone with this, is that he's kind of an ass. He's mean to the local population, not doing a good job of winning hearts and minds there. And he's given a warning, get the hell out of there, because there's Confederates in the area that are coming for you, and you're not going to be able to hold against them. And he said, please. He had this attitude like, oh, pshaw. And so, and he likened himself to Nero. And anybody who purposely draws a parallel between himself and a horrible emperor like Nero is kind of an ass. So this song, to me, I totally chose it on. There's a few songs that are chosen on superficial levels, and this is one of them. It just sounds to me like a drunk on power tyrant marching at the head of his army down the streets of a city that he just conquered and is about to occupy, and a man who's completely lacking in self-awareness. It's just because it's got that big like boom, that just, and so that's why I chose that. But Soldier's Chorus, though, probably has a whole different history and meaning, and maybe I'm totally wrong in doing it, but like I said, it's superficial. So tell us about Soldier's Chorus.
Well, the Soldier's Chorus was written by Charles Gounod, and it's from his opera Faust. And of course, that's the famous story about the man who sells his soul to the devil.
Okay, so maybe this is accidentally a well-placed song.
Yeah, it's I believe it takes place where the leading lady is her brother is heading off to war. And so it's supposed to be bombastic sounding.
Yes. Oh, that's the word I was searching for.
Yeah. So that would make a good representation of that officer you were just describing. and by the way, this is a great example of the type of music that the soldiers liked. During that time, they knew the operas. And they wanted to hear, the arias and the choruses from famous operas. Verdi was very popular among the troops, and the operas like Faust was also very popular. So that's where that comes, and that was written, I think, just prior to the Civil War. So it could almost like be popular. It was popular music at that time. Right.
Okay. And there's another one I didn't write on my list, and I believe it appears in. I think it's in the next episode. But well, along the lines of Soldier's Chorus with Milroy, the theme that I choose for Hooker is Yankee Doodle. And I pick it because, especially, I think I have a fife and drum version of it in episode 1, and it's got more of a here comes Yankee Doodle, like it, because I think it's actually the old guard, and I don't know if I really should be using it, but I found it and I was like, oh, this is too good. But the drums, it's not your typical march. It's like got a really not laid back, but a delayed, kind of behind the beat feel to it. It's pretty cool.
Right.
And so I used that when I first introduced Joe Hooker after he takes over from Burnside. And so I chose that version of it because it's kind of like, well, we don't know what he's going to do yet. So he might, he talks a great game. So maybe this guy's, the real deal. So the drums are a little bit more foreboding. But then when we get to the brass music, it's more upbeat and, dun, 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 like staccato kind of. And so now he's made an ass out of himself with the Chancellorsville debacle. And now he's just kind of feeling around blind. And it's kind of done in a mocking way, quite like how the British used it against the colonial soldiers, so the Continental Army. So what is the story behind Yankee Doodle?
Well, Yankee Doodle, of course, dates back to the colonial time. And as you said, it was probably written as a derision of the Yankee, against the Yankees or the colonists. Stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni. When I was a kid, I was trying to figure, why would he stick a piece of pasta in his head?
Yes, never made sense.
Right. And of course, macaroni means like overdone decoration. That soldiers would wear, fancy epaulets, stuff like that.
Oh, interesting. I took that to
macaroni.
I did not know that. I thought it meant that the Yankee Doodle is so stupid that he thinks a feather is a macaroni. So maybe I'm the stupid one.
So right. So the feather with, that's a gaudy thing.
Yeah.
It's, it's just like having the bright and shiny epaulets or something like that. Shoulder scales. You put a feather in there and you call it macaroni. So, the song, and that's one of the few songs that still exists from the colonial time into the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
But it's quite popular, and once again, it's another song that is under consideration as our national anthem.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, how weird that would be at a football game.
Yeah, right. Can you imagine standing up to
no
Yankee Doodle? So,
well, but you know what I like about it, though, that it's become such an American song, and I think a lot of us today could take a lesson from take a cue from this. Here is it was written to deride us, but we turned it around and made it a national air for like morale boosting. Like we embraced it and we're like, yeah, well, whatever. We still kicked your ass. So you can say whatever you want about us. And now it's a song that we embrace and it's an American song. So we took the power away from them to laugh at us by saying, yeah, we like this.
Exactly. And the same thing with the title, too. That was the term of derision against the colonists. They were Yankee Doodles.
Yeah, what's a doodle?
That's a good question.
I mean, I know I doodle on my notebooks all the time, but I don't think that's what they mean. Oh, you know what? It's probably related to dude. I think because I think I heard this somewhere, and nobody quote me on this, but look it up for yourselves. But I think I was reading something about the word dude and how it came about, and they said it was a shortened, Americanized version of the word doodle, which was kind of like a city slicker. The context they used it in the Old West was it was a city slicker. It wasn't a cool guy.
Oh.
A dude was like some guy who came out from the East and, kind of like Marty McFly in Back to the Future 3 when he goes back in 1950s Western wear with all the fringe and all that stuff, like a guy who would show up to a frontier town, dressed to the nines based on something he read in a dime store or something like that. And I think I do believe that they might have said that it might have been, at least, if not definitely was, a shortened version of doodle. and Doodle was the same idea, like an imposter who really didn't know what the hell he was doing, but he dressed a certain part, but he really wasn't that part, which would go along with what you're saying with the macaroni thing.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Now I'm going to have to look up the derivation of the word doodle and find out where that came from.
Yeah, nobody take my word for that, but I hopefully that'll point you in the right direction to learn for yourselves. All right, so then the part 1 of episode 2 ends with the Maryland Guard Gallop. And right before we go into that, and the credits go over this, and right before we go into that, I mentioned that after the Battle of Winchester, Jenkins is sent up ahead to get up to Chambersburg on June 15th. Well, the first thing he does when he crosses the Potomac is he goes in through Maryland. So, that's kind of another superficial reason there. But Gallop, it's an exciting, upbeat song. And at this point, nobody knows the Battle of Gettysburg is going to occur. Nobody knows how horrible it's going to be. The Confederates are high in morale because they're going to go into this lush, untouched countryside, and they're going to, get food and get everything that they need. They're going to get out of war-torn Virginia. And, depending on who you ask, some are thinking, well, we're going to really exact revenge on them. And others are like, I just want to get out and eat some good food or, whatever. It's just an excursion. It's a good time. So I want it to feel for the listener when they get to the end of the second episode, I want them to feel like the Confederates might have felt upbeat, excited to go on this adventure. And, unbeknownst to them, they're going to have their asses handed to them in a little while. So, so that's why I picked that. Now, so what's the story, though, with the Maryland Guard Gallop?
Well, the Maryland Guard Gallop was written for about the Maryland Guard, which was one of the militia units that existed in Baltimore pre-Civil War. Militia units were found everywhere in our country prior to the Civil War. And these militia units were usually made up of young, well-to-do young men who would sign up with these militias for the nice fancy uniforms and everything. They would do regular drills and then have parades and picnics so they could bring their sweethearts and their wives down to watch and stuff. Mm-hmm. These organizations were the ones that were called into federal service at the beginning of the Civil War. One of the more prominent ones was and I can't remember exactly which number it was, guard unit of Maryland. At the beginning of the Civil War, these young men had an issue that came up because a lot of them had Southern sympathies. Because Baltimore, like Maryland, was a border state, and there was a lot of Southern sympathies to be found. So it's interesting that this particular unit, most of them went south and joined up with the Confederate Army. But at least they left us this real nice piece of music. and on it, if you can find it online, it has a wonderful color lithograph of these two soldiers, or two or three soldiers in the uniform of that militia at that time. Just very bright, gaudy looking, like it's based on the French Zouave type uniforms. Oh,
that was very popular back then, wasn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of these militia units, they were able to design their own uniforms. Yeah. But But of course, as they became federalized, they had to wear the standard uniform. Because those fancy uniforms did not hold up very well in battle.
Right. And I just think the whole Zouave thing looks so ridiculous. I don't know how it was so popular back then.
And there were some units that wore them for the duration of the war.
I know.
There was even a band, one of the Pennsylvania Zouave bands, wore that uniform.
Well, I could see that with a band, though.
Yeah, and their unit, the whole unit wore it.
Okay.
It's just amazing. Yeah, but I just can't imagine how they could wear them during battle to keep them, in any kind of condition.
Yeah, I mean, how do you go through a thicket without your pants getting caught on thorns? And it's just impractical. Okay, so now we get into episode 2, part 2. And the first brass band song that we come to is called Out of the Wilderness. And it's when we start talking about the founding of Gettysburg. Very simply, this was another superficial one. It is called Out of the Wilderness, and Gettysburg basically sprung up out of the wilderness. This was way out there, and then this little crossroads town starts to develop out of all of that. And then also it's a good song. It's a rousing number. Like, hey, this is the start of something big, and so I chose it for that reason too, for the audience to put them in an up mood. So, but it's an interesting song though. It's not just about it's not about Gettysburg at all. But go ahead, give us a little history of that.
Well, the tune actually is based on a very familiar song, "The Old Gray Mare, She Ain't What She Used to Be," that you'll hear in the last strain of it. A very popular tune. It was actually used by Lincoln as one of his campaign songs. They said, "Old Abe came out of the wilderness." It was also known as a tune called "Down in Alabama." And also appears in some band books as Old Joe Hooker, which I guess is a reference to General Hooker.
Yeah, I imagine so.
But what's interesting about that tune, too, when you hear it, like I said, based on that tune, "The Old Gray Mare, She Ain't What She Used to Be," it's got this polka feeling and like German polka type quality to it, and certainly that would have fit the area of Lancaster County.
Sure.
In that area where there are a lot of Germans settled. So it's a good choice for that particular section.
Yeah, I thank you. I think that a lot of these choices are. I have my reasons for them, but then I also find that I accidentally chose them for other good reasons that that I wasn't aware of. So that is always good. And then the next one is "We Are Coming, Father Abraham." Now this is where I'm talking about the layout of the town. We have 10 roads come in and out of Gettysburg. Takes you everywhere on the compass. Those roads, obviously the people who volunteered from the county, I would imagine they came here to Gettysburg to get together before they marched off to Harrisburg to be mustered in, or down to Washington, or wherever they would go. So these roads, we are coming, Father Abraham. We're going to get on these roads, one of these roads, maybe 2 of these roads, and we're going to come down and we're going to fight the war effort. And so that's kind of what I was thinking with that, even though we're not talking about the volunteers leaving at this point. I just, for some reason, that just made sense to me. And then also, again, the sound of the song, the way the song sounds. But what's the real story behind that song?
Well, it's a great song, and it's very interesting. Is that it's actually a poem. You know, we are coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more from Mississippi's winding stream and from New England's shore. You know, we're leaving our farms and all this to come and fight for you, Father Abraham. And it was actually set, this poem is actually set to music by a few different composers, one of them being Stephen Foster. The one that you have is not the Stephen Foster version. I believe it's the one by Emerson, but I can't remember. It's been so long since I've seen the program notes. But it's one of those, you know, rallying cries, you know, to come help us out, finish the job.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it says it was. It's from 1862, and it was in response to Lincoln's call for 300,000 troops that year. And you're right; it is Emerson that wrote it.
Oh, good. Yeah, did the music?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
he was Lincoln, a church music composer. It says here.
Oh yes, that's right.
Luther Emerson.
And I like this particular version more than the Stephen Foster version, but that's just my own personal taste. And I think the reason I liked it is because I heard a recording of it done by the Eastman Wind Ensemble in 1960 on their album of Civil War music. So that's why we decided to include it. But you know, Lincoln certainly would have heard it. And what's very interesting, too, is that Lincoln hated being called Father Abraham. He did not like that term at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't like that either.
But, you know, it's one of those songs that, you know, appealed, you know, to young men, you know, tried to get them to sign up, you know, calling for 300,000 volunteers to come in and do the job. I mean, Lincoln called at the beginning of the Civil War, called for 75,000 volunteers in April of 1861, and you know they were absolutely flooded with you know young men signing up to be in the army. You know, towards the end of the Civil War, it was very tough. Actually, even by the mid the Civil War in July of 1863. With the drafts starting and everything. Yeah. I mean, shortly after Gettysburg, there were draft riots in New York City where they burned recruitment offices. For 3 days, they had riots all over New York. They took it, unfortunately, as a time to kill African-American citizens. Yeah. It was just an awful time in New York, and troops fresh from Gettysburg had to be sent to New York City to put down the rioting. And one of the units that was sent there was the 3rd United States Infantry, the professional soldiers. And the thought was, and I've heard this put out before, is that they didn't want to send any of the state militia, you know, regiments to go there for fear that they might side with the rioters. So they had to send the federal professional soldiers to come and put down the rioting, and which is a very interesting, you know, when you look at what's happening today, you know, with the National Guard and federal troops. You know, we can't put federal troops into our cities today because that's, you know, against the law.
Right.
And, you know, it's the governors of the states that only have the power to, you know, activate National Guards, which were back then the militias. So, you look back 160 years, not much has changed.
No. And that's what's interesting and helps me put everything that's going on today in perspective, and also scares the hell out of me about everything today, because when you study the Civil War, I mean, people always say, oh, we're the most polarized we've ever been. No, we're not. We're so far, we're not. The Civil War, I would argue, is the one we were the most polarized we've ever been. But, when you read about the early days of it, I don't know. It's hard not to get scared for whatever we're going into now, because there's a lot of similarities, and at least in as much as the vitriol and the hatred seems to be, and the unwillingness to meet in the middle and compromise, and that's what worries me. But that's not what we're talking about.
Right. Well, just briefly, Lincoln was going through the same stuff. He was called the most vicious things in the newspapers. Yep. And, he was having to fight, the opposition party and fighting against radicals in his own party at the same time, while trying to conduct this war. So, but Lincoln, he would look at articles, that called him, things like the original baboon, stuff like that. Right. And then he would say, well, look at the Richmond papers and look what they're calling Jefferson Davis. Yeah. He had a way of putting things in perspective.
he did. And there's that story of him going to see McClellan, and McClellan not coming down and making him wait there and everything. And, I get it. You're a Democrat. He's a Republican. But Jesus, like, this is your boss. Like, this guy can have you removed from your job. Like, how? But that just goes to show, people say, now they say it, they've said it during Bush and Obama, and in my whole lifetime, there's always been people that say Bill Clinton, George Bush, Barack, whoever you want, is the most hated president we've ever had. And it's like, no, he's not. They're not. Abraham Lincoln was, but half the country left when he won the election. Yes. They're like, that's it. We're done. We don't want this. So please spare me. Like, that guy went through a lot.
Well, you go back even, further in time and read what they were writing about John Adams.
Oh yeah.
They hated him.
Yep. And then even with Jefferson, there was what was that? Stuff about Sally Hemings and him and all that.
Oh, right. Yeah, I don't know how much that happened during his presidency. I mean,
there was
Adams.
Something about that during the presidency. I don't know if it was during the presidency or during the election, wasn't it? Was the election where that was kind of hinted at?
It may have been.
Well, my point is, though, that our politics has never been civil. It's always been awful.
It never has been, and but we've survived so far, and I have a feeling we'll survive even longer.
We will. I just it's the strife we have to go through in order to get to the surviving part that I'm worried about. Yeah. I'm 42 years old. I don't have time for this shit anymore.
Well, I'm 65 and I've seen it all.
Yeah, right. Well, so you probably you have a different perspective than I do. Yeah. All right, so next one. Oh, go ahead. You got something to add?
I was gonna say let's get back to the music.
Oh yeah, okay. So the next one then is Home Run Gallop. Now,
yes.
This song I chose, I said, okay. Well, first of all, the story here is that Gettysburg sends its militia, the Gettysburg Independent Blues, off to fight the war with all their guns. And then they realize, holy crap, there's no one here to protect us, and most of our guns went with them. So what do we do? So somebody's like, all right, let's get in the courthouse. We'll figure it out. So you get in the courthouse, and they have a little meeting. What are we going to do? We got to raise another militia, blah, blah, blah. And then two people come running in, and they say, the Pug Uglies are burning Hanover, and Gettysburg is next. And everybody panics. Oh. And they go out into the streets and they're, oh no, what do we do? What do we do? They start barricading the streets and all this stuff. And finally, a couple of cooler heads said, hey, why don't we take the choo-choo all the way out to Hanover and see what's going on so we have, a better idea of what's coming our way. And so they do. And around midnight, they come back and nothing's going on. Everybody's asleep in Hanover. Nothing happened. There's no Pug Uglies. It's a false alarm. And so right as soon as I say it was a false alarm, this brass band music comes in, and I think does it start off like bum 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 ba bum 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 bum? Yeah, that's it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's it.
Now, to me, this is a comical scene. I'm sure it was scary to the people at the time, but it's a comical scene because I live in Gettysburg, and I know that when it comes to big things, sometimes certain people in this area can't get out of their own way, or they make a decision that is stupid and is going to hurt them, and anyone can see it but they can't see it, and then they dance for joy that they made this dumb decision. So to me, it's like, okay, nothing has changed ever for anybody anywhere. And so I picture the town meeting in Rockridge in the Mel Brooks classic Blazing Saddles.
Yeah.
And this song to me sounds like it could be played in a Mel Brooks movie where the townspeople are all panicking and running around going nuts, and the film is sped up a little bit. So that's why I chose this. It has nothing to do with home runs. It just sounds comical to a comical scene. And I'm a big fan of Hitchcock. And Hitchcock he's a master at weaving suspense and humor in together to play with your emotions and to get you laughing right after he had you, biting your fingernails. So humor has to go in with this because life is humorous. So even the tragedy is humorous sometimes. So Home Run Gallop, that's my story. But what's your story? What's Home Run Gallop really about?
Well, of course, it is about baseball, and it's a gallop, so it's at a very, very quick tempo, and it's included on our CD, which is "Hurrah for the Union," because Abraham Lincoln, probably as a young man, played some sort of town ball or baseball growing up. And he certainly, as president, would have seen some professional baseball games being played close by. Baseball was a popular sport during the Civil War. If anything, the Civil War helped spread baseball throughout the country,
right? Because
it was played everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so the arrangement itself comes from a band book, a printed band book that we found, and we could not find all the parts, so it had to be sort of reconstructed.
Oh.
But it's a delightful little piece, and it when you listen to it, you can really get the feel of people running around the bases and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And by the way, there's a couple political cartoons of the time that have baseball references to it that include Lincoln and Stephen Douglas as the characters in this political cartoon, and they're holding baseball bats and talking about getting home runs and stuff.
Okay.
So baseball had an influence back during the Civil War, and so
sure.
That's one of the reasons we included it. But it's like you said, it's a fun tune, and it sort of has a little bit of a comical air to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, what interested me is what you just said is that you didn't have the complete song, so you had to kind of stitch it together. How did you go about doing that?
Well, we had enough. We had the melody line and the bass line, and so when you have an incomplete arrangement and you have enough of the parts, it's like having a jigsaw puzzle that what's it's missing, and so you just sort of fill it in.
I get it. So you have the bottom, you have the top, so you filled in the middle with theory that is from that time. You know the way they wrote back then, and you know the different things that they would do. I understand what you're talking about. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's interesting.
That's been one of our favorite pieces to play. Because when we introduce it in the last section, which is not on the recording, when we do live performances, we use the clack of a baseball bat in the last section.
Oh, okay, cool.
Just to give the clack.
Yeah. See now, if I use that again for something, I'm going to go and get the clack of a baseball bat now and add it in.
Yeah. Insert with somebody hitting the baseball with crowd sounds or something.
Yeah. So that was a gallop. Remember, that's the fast dance that you can't do for too long. And frankly, I can't even tap my foot to the tempo of a gallop without getting out of breath. So how those people danced, I don't know. They were in much better shape than I. But the next one, and now we're going back to the quick step. And again, the quick step is a march, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this one is the Freedom Quick Step. And this is when we're talking about volunteers going down to the drugstore and volunteering to join the 26, what would become or what was, I don't know, the 26 Pennsylvania Emergency Volunteers. There's a couple of reasons why. First of all, I love the beginning of the song. It's very powerful. It's very martial, but it's cinematically so. Just the images in my head that go through the song, because it goes between the pageantry of the military and the more dour side of the military, the battles. I'm picturing, in the introduction and. The introduction, I picture, cavalry racing off to the battlefield, or maybe artillery, and with the teams attached, they're just running roughshod over whatever they can to get out to the field. The way the intro goes, and then it kind of gets all nice and calm, and then the battle hymn of the Republic, not the battle cry of freedom, is played.
Battle cry of freedom, right?
Yeah, and so now that's more. Now I picture them marching in their best uniform, all nice and tight stepped, and in time, marching down the street, kind of like in Glory when they're leaving Boston and going down to wherever they're going to go to fight. That type of a scene in my head. But then it gets dun, 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 which is kind of like the Blazing Saddles theme. He rode a blazing saddle. Now that I think about it.
That's very good. That's you've got a very good ear there.
Well, I'm a recovering musician, so I still have it. I just don't do it anymore. But so that I play there. But then if you go back, ladies and gentlemen, and you listen to it now with all this in mind, Tilly Pierce has a quote in there. I believe it's about the men volunteering. I don't remember exactly what, or maybe it was Bell's Cavalry. I don't remember what it was, what her quote is. I think it's Bell's Cavalry. But the Battle Cry of Freedom is playing underneath. And this is foreshadowing, because in episode or in part 3, which I'm still finishing up, so that's not out yet. But in part 3, Tilly tells a story of she and her sister and their friends all waving and singing for Buford's troops as they march up Washington Street. And the song that her sister breaks out in is the Battle Cry of Freedom. But they only know 2 lines of the whole thing. So they just keep repeating it over and over again. And one of the soldiers later on said the singing was very nice, but they would have appreciated if they heard more than just the chorus. So I'm forced. So I and that was fortuitous there, that the battle hymn or the Battle Cry of Freedom is in that song, the Freedom Quick Step. But what really got me was the introduction. And that's why I chose it. And then it just worked out that the Battle Cry of Freedom was in there. So go ahead, tell us a little bit about Freedom Quickstep.
Well, Freedom Quickstep, as you pointed out, has a great introduction. And it's actually a medley of 3 tunes. Battle Cry of Freedom, like you pointed out, or Rally Round the Flag.
Mm-hmm.
The next tune after that is When This Cruel War Is Over.
Oh.
Or which is also known as Weeping, Sad, and Lonely.
Yeah. I've seen that title before, but how does that one go?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and then the one that you like that sounds like the Blazing Saddles at the end is a tune called Grafted into the Army.
Okay.
The song about, being drafted, basically.
So again, this actually works out again without me knowing. I'm completely ignorant of all that you just said, but this works out because these guys are all joining up and they're not drafted per se,
exactly.
but they're drafting themselves. Now,
interestingly enough, the arranger of this piece, Freedom Quickstep, was William Withers, who was
Bill Withers. Ain't No Sunshine When She's Gone.
Not quite.
Oh.
That might be his descendant, but Withers was along with his brother, were a member of the U.S. Marine Band in the 1850s, and then left the Marine Band, and then was mustered into one of the state militia bands in the 12th New York. Then came back to Washington, D.C. and worked as a social orchestra leader.
Okay. What's a social orchestra?
They're playing at dances and stuff.
Gotcha. For social gatherings. Gotcha.
Right. And he landed the really nice gig of playing at Lincoln's second inaugural.
Oh, sweet. That's good exposure. Nice gig. Yeah, we're doing it for the exposure, right? But he also was a band orchestra conductor at Ford's Theater. Oh,
and was there the night that Lincoln was assassinated. In fact, had composed a piece of music that was to be performed that night for the first time in honor of Lincoln.
Oh, wow.
But unfortunately, John Wilkes Booth had other ideas, so that piece was never performed. Now, Withers said he was standing backstage when Booth came running by and slashed at him with his knife before running out the door. Not sure if that story is really true or not, but we know that he was there conducting the orchestra on that night. So it's Withers has a great musical background. This is a terrific arrangement, and it's just a little piece of history and his connection with Abraham Lincoln.
That's an interesting story. That's so the inauguration and the death of the president. He was there for both.
Yep, he was. Yep.
Wow. See, that's the beauty of history. Is just you see all these stories are intertwined. All these people's lives are. And how they come together. I was interviewed the other day for a podcast, another podcast, and it's not a history podcast, but he does. It's called Walt's Kitchen Table, and it's pretty good. Like he just sits and talks with people at his kitchen table, but he finds interesting people that do interesting things, and I have no idea why he had me, but whatever. So we're talking about history, and my target audience for the podcast is, especially those narrative episodes, is the person who says, well, history is boring. And I want to prove to them that they're wrong. Yeah. Their teachers were boring, but the history is not boring. And, I say, like, if you think that history is boring, then to me, that tells me that you think your own life is boring. And that's sad. Because everybody is living through history and you never know. And I said this to Walt on the show. I said, like, well, you don't know if, God forbid, years from now, you're in some city and there's some, explosion or some kind of terrorist attack in that city, and you're a witness to it, and people ask you your story and you tell your story, and now it's in the historical record, and maybe you have an interesting story, and someone will say, well, what was this guy's life like before that event? And then now all of a sudden everything that you're doing now that you think is mundane is now part of the legend, the lore, the history of whatever. And yeah, so that story there is pretty interesting, because you just never know when you're going to be at Ford's Theater.
Yeah, exactly.
All right,
and I'm sure he felt really bummed out that his piece wasn't able to be performed.
Yes, of course he was, because he's a musician. He's like, oh right, man, exactly. I didn't get to perform my piece.
Right.
Mary Todd's screaming, and everybody's panicking. He's like, God damn it! Like, just my luck. Oh man, poor fella.
Yeah.
Poor Bill Withers. Okay, so the next one that we get to then is George Hart's Quick Step. Now this is during Jubal Early and Gordon's brigade occupying the town. Early is giving his list of demands to David Kendall Hart, the borough council president. The mayor, or Burgess as it was called then, he had fled. So this is the next authority in the town, I guess, the next highest authority. And I picture this scene. Now, the way I read it in the book I got this story from has Early out in front of Kendall Hart's house, sitting on his horse. Kendall Hart is standing in front of the horse holding the bridle, and Kendall Hart's daughter is observing the scene and taking notes of what Early's demands are and all that other stuff. Our good friend, licensed battlefield guide Tim Smith, says, I don't know where they get this story from the book that I got it from. He goes, I don't know if that's all exactly how the scene looked. And I said, well, I'm going to use it anyway. So I used it, and I picture, Early. Now, Early, he had a tobacco-stained beard. Lee called him my bad old man. He's not what I would think a Southern gentleman would be, nor what the people who wanted everybody to believe that all men in the South were gentlemen would want representing them as what a gentleman would be. And other people, civilians in town who describe the soldiers as they occupied the town on June 26th, describe one lady, Sarah King, I think, she says they reminded her of Falstaff's recruits. And another thing was Michael Jacobs said they were dirty and, raggedy clothes and things like that. And one of the young boys, I forget which one, observed a man riding his horse with spurs attached to his bare feet. And so they're the far cry. And in fact, Michael Jacobs, I believe, said they're a far cry from the, Southern Knights that we're led to believe they are. So the song, George Hart's Quick Step, sounds very Southern. What is that? Old Folks at Home? Is that the song that's in there, the tune?
That's correct. Yeah, a lot of people call it way down upon the Swanee River.
Swanee River. That's what that's what I always was singing. So, super. I think I associate that with the South because of Warner Brothers cartoons, if I'm not mistaken. I feel like Bugs Bunny was singing that in some Yosemite Sam commercial cartoon. But anyway, so I'm picturing this scene, all these, Confederates running around and essentially looting stores, even though they weren't doing it in the sense that we think of today, but they were, getting things with worthless money. If they were paying, and, there's Early standing there, and he's given this list of demands that, just can't possibly be. So there's a juxtaposition, the, gentlemanly sounding music with this very ungentlemanly thing that he's doing, which is basically holding up the town. So that's why I chose that song. I just thought it made a somewhat comical, yet also relaxing feel for the audience's sake, because the end of the episode, which comes up next, is dark. So I wanted to bring them up before I brought them down. So go ahead.
Right.
George Hart's Quick Step. And this is a very quick stepping song, though. The tempo is pretty. I'm sorry.
It's a march tempo. Yeah, it is. I mean, you can march along. You can march along to it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I got you.
It's called George Hart's Quick Step, and when people play it, they say, "Wait a minute, that's not George Hart's Quick Step. That's Old Folks at Home." And also, it's the last part of it too. Which is by Stephen Foster. And the last part of it is another Stephen Foster tune that's thrown in there. I think it's "Oh Boys Carry Me Home." The arrangement of this was done by Claudio Grafula, who gets the credit for this, not Stephen Foster, due to the very lax copyright laws at the time. You could borrow people's melodies and write your own arrangement and call it your own.
Ah, okay.
But
kind of like what rappers do now.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Grafula, by the way, was an incredible composer in his own right. And probably George Hart was somebody he knew. So he said, "Hey, I'm going to write you a piece. I'm going to name it for you." Because there's another one he did, which is called Captain Shepherd's Quick Step, which was probably named for a captain friend that he knew in the regiment he served with. But Grafula was the John Philip Sousa of brass band music during the Civil War. He very prolific, wrote a lot of pieces, original pieces of music, compositions, did arrangements just like this piece. And it's a very nice piece because it quotes the Stephen Foster tune in a very interesting setting at the very beginning. It sets it with the strong beat on the first and the third beat, without any afterbeats, and then breaks it up into a more of a joyful sound to it. So it's a very clever arrangement. Has a very nice little interlude for the E-flat cornets, and then goes into that other tune, "Oh Boys Carry Me Home." So it's a great example of this particular arranger's work.
Yeah, it's very nice, and with all these songs, I said this to you before we started the actual show. The recording quality is great, but you said there's 15 members in the band, right?
Yeah, 15 to 18, I think.
Okay, so less than 20, but it sounds like a 50-piece orchestra, not orchestra, but band. It's really good. You. It's a full sound. It's nice, and I couldn't find any clinkers in there. No sour notes or anything. It's nice.
The band is made up of I believe with that recording we used 3 E-flat cornets, 3 B-flat cornets, 2 alto horns, 2 or 3 tenor horns, a baritone horn, 2 tubas, and 2 percussion. That's it. All brass instruments. We rehearsed a long time before we went into the studio. But there were some clinkers when we did the recording, so there was little magic happening with some of the recording. We were able to edit out a couple bad things.
Well, that's the beauty of editing.
I know, and thank God. And I can't say enough for these great folks at Sheffield. They did a tremendous job, worked with us, and putting this, and we explained how we wanted this, and it, quite frankly, it was the first time they had ever recorded a Civil War band. So there are challenges with that. One of the big challenges with recording these bands, and if you listen very closely, you'll be able to hear what those challenges are. Those instruments, the rotary valves, they make noise. Click, clack, click, clack, click, click, clack, as you play, and you can't edit that stuff out.
Right. But that's part of the authenticity, though.
It's true, but it could be a little, unnerving at times. You hear it all the time, like, oh my God.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But with clever placement of microphones, we were able to, keep it to a minimum. But you still hear it, and that does add to the charm for sure.
Yeah,
and then,
sure.
Of course, we had the challenges with the percussion too, because we used original instruments, and we wanted them to be part of the group, but not be too overwhelming. So we had to have a placement of the drums and sort of have them behind a wall, so it would overpower.
Right.
But it worked out really well. We experimented with a couple things, and thought we had able to produce a very good product.
Where'd you record?
Where?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was Sheffield Studios.
So you were in a studio.
Correct. We were north of Baltimore. Although a couple of the selections on the Hurrah for the Union are live recordings that we did on stage at Ford's Theater.
Right. That was my next question. Yeah. So now that's cool that you got to do that at Ford's Theater. That's pretty
right. Cool. And the band was actually invited to play for its program commemorating the 150th anniversary of the assassination. They put on a special program at Ford's Theater that evening, and the band was part of that program, which we thought was way cool. And then at the end, they stopped the performance at 10:20, and people came outside, and we played hymns. They had a reenactment of Lincoln being carried over to the Peterson House, and then they did an all-night vigil, on the street. They closed the street off, and so we stayed up all night.
Wow!
And then in the morning, we did a performance. The head of the National Park Service came down to officiate over a ceremony, marking the passing of Abraham Lincoln, and at 7:20, church bells around the town rang, and the band played, and we sounded taps for Abraham Lincoln. So it was a tremendous time, something that we'll always remember.
It's amazing how none of us were alive when he was president, but we revere him so much to this day, and you don't see that with a lot of other dead presidents.
Lincoln has, there's still books that are being written about him.
I know.
It's amazing. In the bookstore across part of the theater, they have a spiral staircase that goes up 2 flights. And they have all the books that were written about Lincoln that are piled up. That it reaches two stories. It's amazing.
Oh my
and
God.
so you can walk around the spiral staircase and look at all these books that were written about Lincoln. He certainly is part of our conscience still today. There are two men that I revere in my life, historical figures. One is Abraham Lincoln, and the other is John Philip Sousa.
Yeah,
both made incredible contributions to our nation.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, their paths probably crossed for a very short period of time.
Yeah, Sousa's music is great. I mean, it's
yes.
If there's anything that's going to get me, give me that patriotic chill up my spine, it's Sousa's music. Stars and Stripes Forever is one of my favorites.
Yeah. Sousa's father played in the Marine Band during Lincoln's administration. And so young John Phillip, who was 10, 11 years old, would have heard all the brass bands in Washington, and probably saw Lincoln, at some point in time with his father, because his father playing at the White House all the time, and then probably saw the funeral procession.
Wow.
But interestingly enough, Sousa did not write any piece about Lincoln. It's just one of those things. And I asked a scholar at the Library of Congress, why do you think, Sousa didn't write a Lincoln piece? And the answer was, well, he probably wasn't asked. So,
well, that's a good reason.
Okay, that makes sense. Why not? So now I'm looking back. I wish somebody had asked him. I mean, Sousa wrote compositions, for people would invite him to, like the George Washington bicentennial march. He wrote, pieces, commemorating this and that. But no one asked him to do a piece about Lincoln.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So, yeah, it would have been a great piece, I'm sure.
The last song that we use in episode 2, part 2, is what I call Demented Dixie. Now, I don't know if you noticed what I did, what I did with this, but first of all, the thing I love about having this music to use is the music. It seems like the music written at that time wasn't afraid to pause. Like, they weren't afraid to have a second or two of silence before going into the next phrase or the next part of the song. And that enables me to make pretty clean cuts in a song. See, sometimes I want a song to go under a narration, but the narration doesn't last as long as the song does. But luckily, a lot of these songs repeat a lot. So if it's like a 3-minute song, it's maybe 30 seconds. The whole song is probably like 30 seconds long, but it keeps repeating itself. And so I'm able to then say, well, okay, I want it to end. I want the ending to end with me ending this sentence. And so I just need to go back a little bit and just go to find that gap, that little space there, that 1 or 2 seconds of just nothing. And I can make my cut there and just kind of fade it in so that you don't hear the actual cut. And then boom, it works. And I have very little to do with the other songs, with the other music, like fife and drum music or the string music. It's harder for me to do that for various reasons. But anyway, so for Dixie, or Demented Dixie, as I call it, I cut out the intro, that whole thing.
Right.
But there's a part, it just starts with a hit, a chord hit. It's just, and so I wanted to kind of jump at you. And then I describe what the Confederates did. Well, the first thing we describe is the Confederate band playing in the square with the Confederate flag on a pole. And Sarah Broadhead actually has a good quote about that was written in the script, but I forgot to record it when I had the girl who does Sarah Broadhead. And so I said, well, whatever, I'll make it work without it. So the band's playing in the square. And then I start to describe the other things they did. They burned the railroad bridge. They overturned cars and burned them, and to cut the telegraph wires and all this stuff. And as I'm describing these things, we get further away from the town. So the whole thing here with part 1, for those of you who are astute listeners, part 1 ends with Jenkins on June 15th going into Maryland and Pennsylvania, and he'll end up, and it's in the early morning hours when he leaves. So by later in the day on June 15th, he's in Chambersburg. Part 2 begins with Sarah Broadhead's diary on June 15th after hearing the news that Confederates are in Chambersburg. And now we learn about the town of Gettysburg and the civilians. Part of that is because they went through a lot. There's a story there. But if I were to try to stick with the military movements in June of 1863, everybody's eyes would be crossed by the time they got to the end of the episode. And you'd have to sit there and listen to it with a map, because of all the different places everybody is. So I figured, well, how do I avoid that but still tell a story? And I said, how about we only know what the civilians know, and we'll do it through the eyes of a few of the civilians. And so when we get to the end of this episode, the telegraph wires are cut, and the last line is, Gettysburg was now cut off from the outside world. And as we do that, so we zoomed in from episode 2, or part 1 of episode 2, we're kind of we go from like a 30,000 foot level down to the ground level and then up again, and, a couple of places in between. For part 2, we're mostly in the town, so we're down at ground level. But now, part 3, we're going to go back to the 30,000 foot level in the beginning. So I want to zoom out. And so what I had to do was manipulate the sound, because Dixie, I kind of added some effects to it to make it sound like they're in the square or the diamond or circle or whatever the hell it is. So I tried to make it sound like the music was reverberating off the buildings. And but then as we pull out a little bit, the pitch changes, because I think I'm getting this right. When you get further away from music, the pitch goes down, because the sound waves, by the time they get to you, are bigger. And so that's right. Is that right? Okay. Yeah. So okay, good. I'm glad I got that right. So the pitch goes down a little bit, and it blends. I kind of blend them so that it kind of, you don't hear the pitch change so drastically. I crossfade them, and then we pull out a little bit more, and the pitch gets lower, but now the whistling, howling wind of being at 30,000 feet starts to bleed in, and then fades out, and then we go into the theme of the show and do the credits at the end there. So that's Demented Dixie. The rebels have Pennsylvania by the balls, basically. And that's so that's why I made it sound demented too. But yeah, so I mean, we already talked about Dixie in the beginning, but now we're just kind of, it's a Dixie sandwich. And
right.
So there's really not more to that, I'm sure, that you could add to the whole thing there. But anyway, that's the whole thing with the brass music there. And then when I release the part 3, we've got other songs in there that I'd want you to come back on to talk about as well.
Sure. And by the way, I hope you with part 3, I assume it'll be part of the battle you'll be talking about.
No, it ends the night before the battle.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Very good. Then I was going to say to include any bugle calls that the armies would have played. If you decide to use them, you can find bugle calls that I recorded online. It's not so hard to find. If you put in my name and Civil War bugle calls, you should find an archive where you should be able to download some of the Civil War bugle calls.
Actually, you know what, Yari? I got a couple of reenactor friends that we're going to get together, I think in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, two, was it next? Yeah, it's next Saturday, not this coming Saturday, but a week from Saturday, the 12th, I think that is. And we're going to go to some farm where there's no road noise and record just soldier sound effects, like the tin cup clanking as they march, and bayonets being fixed, all that stuff. And cool. If you're able to come up, I'd like to actually record you doing them out in the field, because it would be a different sound. Sure. That way they would be my recordings, and I could, record it dry and not, worry about manipulate them if I need to.
Sure, that would be the 12th. So yeah, let's circle back on that. Okay.
Okay.
And
I'll talk to my producer Eric, because he's putting that together, and I'll tell him. Well, you let me know if you can do it, and if you can, then I'll have him share the calendar invite with you and everything.
Great.
But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's all that we have for this. You can check out Yari's stuff and the Federal City Brass Band stuff and the 26 North Carolina Regimental Band stuff at www.jvmusic.net. And you can also follow the Federal City Brass Band on Facebook. Yari, it was great to finally talk to you. Sorry we never got to do this in person. I always like to do them in person better, but I can see why you and Wendy are friends, because you're both great people to talk to. You got a good sense of humor, very easy to get you to answer things and go on and talk, and I really enjoyed myself today.
Well, thanks, Matt. I really appreciate being here and sharing some of my knowledge. But I want to mention that I could not do this without the great support of, all those guys who play with the Federal City Brass Band and the 26th North Carolina Band, all my reenactor friends who, do this with me. It's been a great journey now for almost 20 years of doing this. And I loved every minute of it.
And we're going to see if we could possibly do a scaled down, socially distanced little concert maybe for our listeners on after our October tour. Are we still going to try to do that?
Yeah, we're going to try to work on that.
Okay. So
Absolutely.
For those of you listening, if you're thinking, do I want to go to September or October? You'll get to hear some music if you go to October's. Perhaps.
Yes.
All right, Yari. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening, and thank you, Yari, for coming on, and we'll talk to you next time.